What is up, my friend? Welcome back to the basement. I am Mikey Henninger. This is Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, my mom and your mom's favorite fantasy football podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is episode 20 of the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football podcast, and today we're going to get back to the waiver wire. We're going to look at Week 10, which guys to consider adding with a waiver claim and which guys to consider adding after waivers have run. Now, if you've tuned into a waiver wire episode of mine in the past, you'll know I'm very, very frugal when it comes to the waiver wire in fantasy football. Typically, I don't want to spend any sort of priority. I don't want to spend any sort of bidding money on a player unless I'm 100% certain that they will be in my starting lineup either this week or sometime in the future. If I'm not certain that they're even going to see my starting lineup, and if it's possible they're just going to be a bench decoration, then I am not interested in spending any sort of priority. I'd rather save that and save my money and wait for some of those week winners and league winners. Okay, so that being said, my waiver wire articles are usually a little bit different than anything else you'll find in this space because it offers the players that are worth considering with your waiver claim, but beyond that, it offers a list of players to consider adding after waivers run. So for today's episode 20, I do have one player in mind that I think is worth rostering, or one player in mind that I think is worth spending priority or bidding money on. But then I have 29 other guys that I am planning on waking up early on Wednesday morning and trying to add to my rosters after waivers run. Okay. Now, obviously, for the sake of time today, we're not going to cover 30 different players. We're going to cover 4 or 5, including the one that I think is worth a claim. But then if you go over to basementbrewedff.com and click on content, you're going to find the article that has a list of 30 different players and defenses that are worth considering adding to your lineup before Week 10 kicks off. Okay. Starting with quarterbacks. Now, I'm going to mention Justin Fields because I was surprised to realize that he is only he's rostered in more than 30% of Yahoo leagues. He's actually rostered in 69% of Yahoo leagues. That is likely to change. If he's available in your league, this is a guy that is theoretically worth a waiver claim. He's been balling out over the last several weeks just in general. Over the last 3 games, Justin Fields is averaging 30.04 fantasy points, just 151 passing yards, but he's averaging 106.6 rushing yards per game. So he's got that fantasy football cheat code going. He has 6 passing touchdowns in the last 3 weeks, 1 interception, and 3 rushing touchdowns. And of course, all of that was capped off by Week 9's monster performance of 40.72 points, where he had 3 passing touchdowns and 178 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown. He is a must-have on rosters from here on out. So there's a really good chance he's not available in your league, but still, it turns out he's available in more than 3 out of every 10 leagues. And if you're listening and he's on your waiver wire, Justin Fields, and it pains me to say this, I don't know if you see that Packers helmet in the background if you're watching on YouTube, but Justin Fields is a every week quarterback 1 with elite upside. Okay, he's somebody who needs to be on fantasy football rosters, regardless of the size of your league, how shallow it is, the depth of your benches, etc. Now, for a little bit more normal, quote-unquote normal or typical size leagues, Justin Fields probably won't be available. Usually there's not a quarterback that I'm willing to place a claim on, it's actually funny that I say that because this year I've been willing to make claims on both Tua Tagovailoa and Justin Fields to go get that upside. But assuming I don't get any of those guys, and assuming I, let's assume for a second that I need a streamer for the week, be it bye weeks, injuries, what have you, the number 1 quarterback on my streaming radar this week would be Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy is rostered in 39% of Yahoo leagues, okay, so he's available in 61% of leagues out there, theoretically. He, over his last 4 games, he's been averaging 17.75 fantasy points. He's been playing very well. That's right on the fringe of a QB 1-2. And this week, in Week 10, his 49ers are pegged for roughly 26.75-ish points. That comes from the DraftKings Sportsbook. Okay, so their implied total is 26.75, which is currently the fourth highest, the fourth most points, the fourth highest implied points on the 28 team slate. The 49ers are expected to win by 7, which I thought was kind of surprising, at home against the Chargers. And we know the Chargers can have a potent offense that does well enough to keep up with the 49ers, so I think there's actually some sneaky shootout potential there. But if you're in a bind, if you're in a pinch and you're looking for a quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo is a great place to start. He's only rostered in 39% of leagues. He's been playing well. There's nothing necessarily remarkable about his matchup, but the high implied total is encouraging, especially if the 49ers do find themselves in a competitive scenario with the Chargers. Beyond that, I have, 5 different quarterbacks that are on the streaming radar. If you find yourself in a pinch here in Week 10, you can check them out in the article on basementbroodff.com. Now, as for that one player that I mentioned is worth using that waiver priority, asterisk besides Justin Fields. If he's available, Justin Fields is worth that priority. Assuming, of course, you don't have Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, an elite quarterback where Justin Fields would just be a bench decoration for you. Now, if you're in a somewhat normal-sized league, Jeff Wilson is rostered in 52% of leagues. So he's still rostered in a little bit over half of leagues out there, but that means he's available in 48% of leagues. Very surprisingly, I got this one completely wrong in my Week 9 heat map where I said it seemed unlikely that Jeff Wilson would have a major impact in his first game with the Dolphins. Very surprisingly, he played a shocking 49% of the snaps in his first game in South Beach. He's only been with the team a few days, so that came as a surprise. Granted, he's more than familiar with Mike McDaniel's playbook after they spent some time together in San Francisco. They spent quite a bit of time together in San Francisco. So, that familiarity, that had to help him get on the field in a hurry. And he turned 12 touches, which includes 3 targets and 3 catches. He turned those 12 touches into a very productive 72 yards and 1 touchdown, which was good for 16.2 PPR points. Now, the main thing that makes him worthy of a waiver claim is that in this week, his first week with Miami, he completely outtouched, outplayed, and had more playing time than the incumbent Raheem Mostert, who was playing pretty well before Jeff Wilson came to town. So Jeff Wilson outsnapped Mostert 28-27. He had more touches, 12-9. He had more targets, 3-2, more catches, 3-0, and more scrimmage yards, 72-26. Both guys scored a touchdown, but Jeff Wilson had 16.2 PPR points, and Raheem Mostert had only 8.6 PPR points. Now, this was in Jeff Wilson's first game with Miami. Okay, don't go expecting any sort of workhorse production. He's not going to suddenly be this 25 to 30 touch back, but it's pretty clear that there's instantly a new lead dog in Miami, and that is an offense where the lead running back does absolutely carry some fantasy football value. Jeff Wilson can and should be in fantasy football lineups moving forward, especially as bye weeks continue to settle in. Several other names on this list. J.K. Dobbins, by the way, he's rostered in just 57% of Yahoo leagues, and yet Baltimore is going on bye this week, so chances are a lot of people won't be making any claims on any Baltimore Ravens, but Dobbins should be set to return shortly after that, theoretically, and especially if you have IR spots on your team, Dobbins is definitely worth a stash, as he will find his way back to the top of that depth chart. Real quick, do want to mention Rachaad White. Rachaad White is somebody that I mention every week. He's in this list every single week. But to this point, he's been in these lists as a potential league-winning bench stash. He's a guy that becomes an instant RB1 if something happens to Leonard Fournette. Now, this week, he actually has some added value because for the first time ever, I guess, in his very short career, He had a season-high 11 touches. It was his first time going over 9 touches. That included 3 targets and 3 catches here in Week 9. Now, he really didn't do much with them. He only scored, or he only generated 34 yards and didn't score, but he did have just 3 less touches than Leonard Fournette, and he only had 1 less carry than Leonard Fournette, and he was actually much more efficient on his carries than Fournette was. White had 8 carries for 27 yards. Fournette had 9 carries, but just 19 yards. So he was somebody that needed to be rostered because he'd become an instant, just add water RB1 if something happened to Leonard Fournette. But now it's possible he's starting to come into some flex value, especially, again, as bye weeks continue to trickle in. Rachaad White, definitely, if you have any roster space whatsoever, he is the number one in my mind. He's that number one guy that just needs to be hanging out on people's benches, especially if you're hoping to make a deep run, just in case something happens to Leonard Fournette. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other guys on this list for you to check out in that article on basementbroodff.com. If for some reason you can't find it, by the way, shoot me a note on Twitter at BBFFMikey, and I will be happy to get that in your hands. In fact, if you give me a follow on Twitter, let me know where you came from, and I'll follow you right back. All right, wide receivers. A couple, it's hard for me to pick and choose which ones I want to mention here. I do need to mention that George Pickens needs to be on your radar. So, again, this is a guy that's over 50% rostered, 56% rostered to be exact. But he is, if he's available in your league, in the 44% of you that are listening, he needs to be rostered, regardless of the size of your league. So, over his last 6 games, George Pickens' last 6 games, he's averaging 10.2 PPR points and 6.33 targets per game, and that was before Chase Claypool was traded. Chase Claypool, who was averaging 6.25 targets per game. So now Pickens, at worst, becomes the number 2 option in Pittsburgh, and as we've seen him play with Kenny Pickett, Pickens is actually, he's flashed already as a rookie as someone with monster upside, and I think he's somebody that could get peppered with targets over the second half of the year. So if he's out there, make sure to change that. Okay, the other names that I wanted to mention at wide receiver is number 1, well, no specific order here, but I guess I'll say number 1, Mecole Hardman. He's 48% rostered in Yahoo leagues. He's still playing just about 54% or so of the snaps, but over his last 4 games, he's averaging 5.5 targets, 4.25 catches, 56.5 yards, and he has 3 touchdowns in those last 4 games. On average, he's getting about 18.28 points PPR points per game over his last 4. It's clear that Patrick Mahomes trusts him, so even though he's not getting the big playing time that you would want to see, right? That 54% is a little bit nerve-wracking. He's producing on the limited time that he has. So either way, he should be rostered. Last wide receiver I'll mention is Terrace Marshall, who's only 6% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Now, if you'll recall, if you listened to last week's episode, Terrace Marshall was one of my favorite rookies last year, second-round pick for Carolina. After Robbie Anderson got traded, he got bumped. Terrace Marshall got bumped up to the wide receiver 2 spot in Carolina, and he has, over the last 2 games with P.J. Walker, who was benched for Baker Mayfield. However, it was announced that P.J. Walker would start the Week 10 contest, and over Terrace Marshall's last 2 games, he has 15 targets. He had 9 in one game and 6 in another, and he's got 27 PPR points, 12.7 in one, 14.3 in the other. He did that over the last 2 games. He's played at least 86% of the snaps or more since taking over for Robbie Anderson 3 games ago. It's clear that P.J. Walker is capable of getting his wide receivers the ball. Now, to be honest, I wouldn't be nearly as bullish on Terrace Marshall if Baker Mayfield was at quarterback. The guy cannot get his wide receivers the ball for whatever reason. But as long as P.J. Walker's under center, DJ Moore is much more appetizing than he was earlier in the year, and Terrace Marshall is a very nice flyer. Now, if you're in a shallow league, if you're in a small league, Terrace Marshall probably doesn't make too much sense to roster. There's too much inconsistency there. But for the bigger, deeper the bigger, deeper leagues, Terrace Marshall is going to be somebody that's worth having on your radar and definitely on your roster. All right, beyond those three, I have 5 other wide receivers to consider. Actually, let's talk about one more here real quick. We're only at 15 minutes. We can do this thing. Donovan Peoples-Jones, you guys. He is 21% rostered in Yahoo leagues. He has 11 or more PPR points in 4 of his last 5 games. And most excitingly for me, most excitingly for the 250 plus Basement Brood Fantasy Football subscribers, DPJ pops up very, very high on the positive touchdown regression cheat sheet that I put together for my subscribers every week. So this cheat sheet is something I do for my subscribers to easily show them mathematically who is and is not likely to score touchdowns in the coming week. And DPJ pops up very, very high on that list. So it's entirely possible we'll finally see that Donovan Peoples-Jones touchdown here sooner than we do later. And long term, don't forget Deshaun Watson's return is not that far away. All right, as for tight ends, I have no idea why Greg Dulcich is 36% rostered in Yahoo leagues. It makes no sense when you consider how thin the tight end position is and how hard it is to find any sort of production outside of Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. So Greg Dulcich is 36% rostered. That needs to go way, way up. So if he's available on your league, please make sure he's no longer available after Wednesday morning. He played 87% of the Broncos snaps before they went on bye in week 8. And over the last 2 games he's played, he's compiled 14 targets, 10 catches, and 138 yards. Again, just over the last 2 games. And he has scored between 11 and 13 PPR points in all 3 games that he's played in his career. He's only played 3, but every game in Greg Dulcich's career, which, by the way, traditionally and historically speaking, rookie tight ends don't often produce a lot of fantasy football points. Like, we're still waiting for Kyle Pitts, right? Not really a comparison there, 2 very different guys and situations, etc. But Greg Dulcich has played 3 career games, and he's never scored under 11 PPR points. There's no reason this guy should be just 36% rostered at fantasy football's weakest, thinnest position. And in week 10, the Broncos face Tennessee. And that is a defense that was already allowing the 12th most PPR points to tight ends before Travis Kelce put 10 catches and 106 yards on them. And the only reason I don't have the updated numbers is because I'm still waiting. I'm recording this before the Monday Night Football game, so I haven't updated the full what team stacks up where compared to other teams. So Tennessee came into week 9 allowing the 12th most PPR points, and then Travis Kelce dumped 10 catches and 106 yards on them. Greg Dulcich is next. There's 2 other tight ends for you here to check out on the article on basementbroodff.com. Beyond that, I have 4 defenses for you to consider streaming if you stream your defenses like I do in the article on basementbroodff.com. Again, the easiest way to find this, type in www.basementbroodff.com and click content. Bam. That article should be right front and center for you. By the way, if you dig this kind of analysis, if you dig, stats, data, facts, things that help you make confident fantasy football decisions, then you might be interested in the same exact weekly package that all 250 plus subscribers are getting from me on a weekly basis. They are getting access to our live member community, which is it's a Discord channel of active subscribers that are dedicated to helping each other win. They are getting live recommendations sent straight to their phone. So when injuries happen, when news happens, I send out a live update to people recommending, hey, go pick up this guy, drop this guy. They have access to Ask Me Anything sessions every Monday and Friday. They're getting that weekly touchdown regression cheat sheet that I mentioned. They're getting a streamer cheat sheet for quarterbacks, tight ends, defenses, and kickers. They are getting weekly rankings. And most importantly, they are getting my signature weekly fantasy football heat map, which I'm scrambling to try and pull up real quickly here for those watching on YouTube. But basically, this is a resource that I started creating several years ago that's meant to help with start-sit decisions, but a lot of people also use it when building DFS lineups, when making player prop bets, and really conquering some of those really difficult start-sit decisions that we're plagued with every single week. The heat map contains analysis for 250 plus players every single week. Anybody you could possibly be considering in your lineup or in a prop bet, simply click on their name and get a thorough, detailed, written analysis that discusses game trends, how that player's been trending, how their teammates have been trending, how the defense they're playing against has been trending, all that and more. By the way, this weekly package that I'm referring to, it costs a beer per month. That's it, a beer. It costs one beer per month. Or if you want to think of it a different way, it's 18 cents per day, and all of this stuff is delivered right to you. So if you're into this sort of analysis, you're into the sort of thing where you get all the data, the stats, the facts, everything that you can need to make confident fantasy football decisions, I got you. Shoot me a note on Twitter at basementbroodff.com. Send me an email at mikey@basementbroodff.com. If you have any questions at all, please get in touch with me. Let me know. Otherwise, you can sign up right at basementbroodff.com/signup. Okay? That's a wrap on today's show. I will be back on Friday with episode 21, which will be a fantasy football preview of Week 10. Again, I'm going to use my Week 10 fantasy football heat map, and we'll discuss a few players, possibly from each game. That episode will be out on Friday on podcast as well as YouTube, as always. Until then, please be sure to like, subscribe, rate, and review. I know you hear that every time you listen to a show, but you have no idea how helpful that stuff is for any of us that are trying to create content and build a business and feed our families. So thank you so much for doing that. And as always, seriously, the fact that you're watching this, the fact that you're listening to this, it means more to me than I'll ever be able to put into words for you, writing or via camera, via microphone. It means more to me than I'll ever be able to say. Thank you so much for being here. Cheers. This brew's for you.